Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and wow, what a couple of weeks it has been in gaming this last couple of weeks. There has been so much going on, not only in all of the announcements and showcases and the news, the new trailers and all of that stuff that we've seen coming out as part of the Summer Game Fest period. But for me personally, actually, I've played some really good games since I last spoke to you on the podcast. It's been a really interesting little period of gameplay and a really interesting little sequence of games and demos that I've tried out. So there is lots to talk about today. The featured game of the episode is going to be a visual novel from Don't Nod, Makers of Life is Strange. I've played that one in its entirety. I binged it over a weekend, in fact. I think I was just in the mood for a slow visual novel kind of game, and it really ticked the boxes. I've got a lot to say about that one. It's called Harmony, The Fall of Reverie. I also picked up a couple of demos that came out. I wasn't expecting these ones on the slate, but a demo came out for Viewfinder, a game that you might have seen. It is a portal-ish, first-person-y kind of game with a perspective trickery. So I played the short but effective demo for that on PS5. I'll talk about that a little. And then just a couple of days ago, we also got a Final Fantasy 16 demo, which I speculatively tried out. And spoilers, it made me pre-order the game. That doesn't happen very often. It's out in a week, so it was a good demo. Got some things to say about that too. And it put me in the mood for JRPGs, actually. It's not out for another week, even though I have it waiting to be downloaded on my PS5. So I thought, what else is on my backlog? What JRPGs have I got that could fill the gap? And so I decided to play a little bit of Tales of Arise, a game from a couple of years ago now. But I played the demo of it, really liked it, bought it, and then never opened it again. A tale that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It was in the backlog, but it's out of the backlog. It has arisen, and I've been playing some of that as well. I've played 4 hours of that, and I'm quite impressed. But before we get to all those games, maybe it's good to start with the news block of the show. And there has been so much news, it's unbelievable, it's kind of silly really. I've watched most of the showcases, some of them I skipped through or looked up the highlights after the fact. Some of them were so packed that it just flew by so quickly that only a few games kind of leapt out and grabbed my attention. But I'm going to report a couple of games from all 7 of these showcases that have happened, and just try and rattle through them pretty quickly. The first one that was up was the Tribeca Game Fest. This was like a classy Day of the Devs style presentation, and there were 3 games that jumped out for me here. I loved seeing the developers speak. I loved seeing them explaining their game. All of them had a little bit of gameplay in there, as well as the key art and all of those things that the bigger showcases tend to focus on completely, cutscenes and CG, etc. Most of these showed you a little bit of what the game actually was, and it was so nice to hear from the people making the game about what they think is interesting about the game. This is by far the best format that we've seen, I think, in this showcase season. And Tribeca Game Fest had some really good games. A Highland song was there. Some of you may be aware of this one. It is by Inkle, who traditionally make narrative games. I've covered a few of them on the show, like Overboard and Heaven's Vault. And this time it's a platformer set in Scotland. But it seems like a story-heavy platformer with their typically arresting art style. I loved the colour scheme in this one. There was lots of stormy skies, lots of purple heather, and deep blues and deep greens. It really captured that Scottish Highlands feel. It was interesting to see that the platforming has got a few interesting mechanics to it, such as not being able to fall too far. They wanted to add a little bit of realism, a little bit of hiking feel to it. So there is endurance for climbing, and you can only fall so far. There is sliding, after which your character will become tired. So I think it's supposed to feel like a slog. But it looked really, really nice. I liked that there was some resistance as you were exploring in this game. We didn't get a release date. In fact, IGN has one posted from months ago saying it was coming out in February of this year. So I guess it's running behind. It says coming soon on Steam. The next one that caught my eye was called Nightcape. This is a game set in the Middle East. It has like an Arabian cultural feel to it. It's a 2.5D action adventure, so left to right scrolling, sometimes going into the screen. And the interesting thing about this one is that it involved the night sky. So as you are platforming and fighting and doing all of those action-adventure things, there are moments where you look up to the sky and you connect stars in the sky to solve puzzles and get messages and that kind of thing. There were some really cool scenes of the protagonist reaching up and rolling clouds over the stars or rolling them back, peeling them back to look at the sky. It reminded me of Paradise Marsh, a game that I reviewed in which I said I wish that more games let you speak to the sky, and maybe this will be one of them. And the third game from Tribeca Games Fest that jumped out to me was called Despelote. If I'm pronouncing that right, I do not know. And this is a game I've never seen before. This is a first-person soccer game, but it's about the culture of soccer. So it's playing with kids in parks, playing amateur football, running around the world, kicking a ball with your friends. It seems like an interesting look at what football means culturally. The developer spoke at length about how football has been a part of his life. It had a really cool aesthetic, like the background was in one colour. It was all texture, like a single colour photo that's just been reduced to the textures. It looked really, really cool, and then the characters were in a different colour and they popped. So it was a very stylized world, Despelote, pretty cool looking game. Next up was the Wholesome Direct, and this was the most rapid fire of all of them. They rattled through 80 games in 1 hour. So, that's more than a game a minute. This meant that they blurred together to me, and I think that's partially because of the sheer amount of games, but also because a lot of them have that Wholesome Games style. Lots of blobby, colourful, lo-fi games. Lots of farming, lots of running around talking to people and life sim and stuff like that. But so there were only a couple that really popped out and grabbed me in the Wholesome Direct. I've got 3 here. The first one is called Station to Station. It was a really fun-looking voxely railway builder that I've added to my wish list. It looked really nice. You were dragging tracks around. You were redirecting trains. It looked really relaxing. It looked like it might have some of that Dorf-romantic energy to it. The next one really seared my eyeballs, actually. I went and watched this trailer again afterwards. It was called Grimoire Groves. This was a game that was announced as a Kickstarter and hit it out of the park within the first day, is now fully funded. It has an April 2024 release date attached to it, but let's see how that goes. This was another top-down game. It was very, very colourful. It had a prismic, eye-popping palette. And it's a farming game with a life sim element to it, very wholesome games, in which you play as a witch. You can cast magic to help the plants grow. You're getting seeds and planting, you're talking to villagers, and you're adventuring at the same time. It looked really promising. It had a couple mechanics in there, like there was a Pikmin-style system, seemingly, where you get little buddies that you can have come with you. The characters looked interesting. The art was amazing. Grimoire Grows, definitely on my radar. And the third one from Wholesome Direct was called Botany Manor. This one looked pretty lo-fi and early on, but it was quite an involved-seeming 3D gardening simulator, first person. And I love plants. It's like a big hobby of mine. My house is absolutely full of plants. And so the virtual task of bringing up plants, clipping them, propagating them, finding different seeds, finding the place to put them, arranging them, it seemed really, really relaxing. So Botany Manor went onto my radar too. In Wholesome Direct, we also got 3 release dates for games that I've mentioned previously. Fall of Porcupine is coming out on June 15th. A promising-looking Night in the Woods style adventure game with a cool art style in which you play a health worker. Venba, the family-based cooking adventure where it's like stories through food, very, very colourful, primary colour palette and very impressionistic visuals. And you're learning recipes and cooking and talking about food with your mother. Looks really cute. July 31st and coming to Game Pass. And then Minako's Night Market, a game that has been knocking around seemingly forever. Another little witchy game that has a release date now, October 26th. So I think that will be pleasing news to a lot of people. Next up was one that a lot of people were looking forward to. It was the Xbox Showcase. They showed a whole bunch of CG trailers that left me cold for things like Hellblade 2 and Fable. It was more like little vignettes of the game. I couldn't really tell what Fable is, or this iteration of Fable. It was like a little CG short that you might get at the start of an animated movie. No idea what the actual game is, so don't know what to say about it really. But there were a couple of indies folded in here, and a couple of big games too. The 3 indies that caught my eye. One of them is called Jusant. It is a climbing game from Don't Nod, who actually made the game that I will be reviewing later in this show, Harmony, the Fall of Reverie. This was a really cool-looking climbing game. It seems like the sole mechanic is climbing. So if you go to the rock gym or if you do any abseiling, that kind of thing, it was that kind of vibe. Finding handholds, finding ways around obstacles. There were some parts where you were swinging and the art looked great. And I love a good traversal game. It was my favorite thing about Death Stranding. I would have loved it if you could take away all of the opponents and opposition that you get in that game, all the ghosts and all that stuff, and just hike, because I loved it. I loved that feeling of hiking through the wilderness. Jusant looks like a vertical version of that. I'm very curious to see how that game comes out. There was another game announced from the Chinese Room, who made Dear Esther, and I think Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Two games that I really like. It was called Still Wakes the Deep. It was automatically interesting, I think, because it's from the Chinese Room. We haven't heard from them for a while. It's a first-person narrative horror game, but it looks like it's set on an abandoned oil rig, which is creepy as hell. There were all these scenes of operating machinery, flipping switches in dripping control rooms, going up onto a wind-whipped helipad. And the Chinese Room make interesting places to explore. In Dear Esther, it was a little Hebridean island. Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. It was a 1980s Shropshire village that looks exactly like the village where I grew up. And I love just looking around the worlds that they make. So this is an interesting twist from them. Still Wakes the Deep. It had an early 2024 release window. And the third indie game that I have here is called Dungeons of Hinterberg. It's an interesting looking indie game, third-person action-adventure. A very bright, cartoony art style. It looks like a fantasy world where you're running around, whacking stuff, getting into combat and exploring. Dungeons of Hinterberg. We didn't see an awful lot of it, but it definitely went onto my radar. And then there were a couple of big ones. So Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty has appeared, and I'm absolutely hyped for this game. We have seen a little bit of it before, but there's been some really exciting news about that DLC. It sounds like the team have gone back to the drawing board on some elements of the base game. And so they've reworked the perks system and the skill tree. They've redesigned police encounters that didn't really work in a Cyberpunk base game. And it has Idris Elba and a whole new chapter of the story. Keanu Reeves is back in a big way as Johnny Silverhand. So this is really exciting to me. I can't wait to go back into that world. I actually have some stuff left to do in that game. There are still endings that I want to get. Once I saw credits, I tailed off. I've always intended to go back, and now I definitely will when this lands, especially if the base game is better. There are still whole story strands that I need to finish in that game, so really excited for that one. That's coming on September 26th. We also got a really substantial look at Starfield, a game that I think a lot of people are really curious about. This is Bethesda's Skyrim in space, or Fallout in space, you could say, taking their open world RPG formula and putting it in a wide galaxy that you can explore via ships, going to different planets and so forth. The visual style of Starfield looks brilliant. I was so impressed by the look of this game. It has this dusty Star Wars style feel. The George Lucas lived-in universe is very present here. It looks like it's had a major visual upgrade since the last time that we saw it. And we got to see some more systems too. One of the ones I was most excited about was space piracy. So you can fight ships in space, and then you have a choice when they are low on energy, whether you would like to target their engines and immobilize them or destroy them. And if you immobilize them, you can board them and have like an on-ship first-person battle with the inhabitants that are left, and then steal that ship and make it your own. And it goes back to your garage, and then you can fly it around later. We also saw a smuggling system where you can try and conceal goods on your ship and get them through security scans, which is like that Han Solo fantasy. The RPG elements look cool. The skill trees look cool. It looks like you can really customize how you want to play, how you want to fight, what kind of character you want to have. The art style is wonderful. It has a wonderful design sensibility. Lots of 80s style NASA design. If you can picture the NASA logo in your head, I think they've taken that as a jumping off point, and they've used it in all of the graphic design across the game. There were some less good aspects too. The facial animations, the body animations, the dialogue and story stuff look really, really rough actually. It looks kind of last gen. But it's such a big game that obviously it can't have that level of detail that you might get in a more curated experience, like a Hellblade, for example, which is linear. In such a big world with so much going on, maybe that's not the focus, but even so, it looked a little bit behind the times. The gunplay, I'm not fully sold on. It looked a bit rudimentary. It was like pap, pap, and die, pap, pap, and die. But you can jetpack around as well, which was cool. I have to say as well, I was surprised by how much No Man's Sky stuff has been pretty directly lifted. Like we saw the way that the UI works, where you can scan planets, see what resources they have, find points of interest, and then land there. And then when you're on a planet, you can run around and you can mine stuff, you can scan vegetation and wildlife, and you get XP for that, all of which is exactly the same as No Man's Sky. So it's very interesting that this game is positioning itself. I mean, not even positioning itself. They didn't mention No Man's Sky, but it's just so close to that game. I'm very curious how those two will compare, especially because No Man's Sky has grown across time and has so much packed into it, so many systems that have been refined through playtesting, through talking to the audience. I'll be interested to see Starfield next to No Man's Sky and just see how the two compare, because it is much more heavily inspired by No Man's Sky than I ever would have imagined. There was also an extended Xbox showcase where we got a more in-depth look at some of the locations and systems of those games, but they squeezed in a very, very short, like 1 minute little smash cut of the ID at Xbox Developer Accelerator Program. These are games they've picked from underrepresented developers, people of color, people of different gender, sexuality, and all of that stuff. And this had some such interesting looking games in it, but they were just absolutely thrown to the back of all of this stuff, which is a shame. Like, at least they're platforming diverse developers, but they weren't platforming them very hard, I have to say. It was a very short piece in a very long presentation. But there were some interesting games there. There was a game called Halibut that I've mentioned before on the show. This is a fully stop-motion underwater adventure game with absolutely beautiful, physical-looking graphics, where you play Harold in a sunken space station that has gone beneath the waves, and everybody has been living there for generations. It looks absolutely wonderful. I've had my eye on this one for quite some time. It looks like it's going to be coming to Game Pass, and it's going to be coming in early 2024. As far as I can see, this game has been in development for 7 years already, and the fact that that is coming, and it got such a small place in this showcase, was a bit of a shame, but it's great news that it's coming. There was also a bunch of just crazy stuff in here. There was a drag queen beat-em-up called Drag Her, featuring queens from my favorite reality show, RuPaul's Drag Race. So people like Ben de la Creme are in it, and Alaska, and you're just fighting as drag queens. Looks crazy, not sure what to make of it, glad it exists. We got a glimpse of Island of Winds. This is a game that's being made right here in Iceland. It's a Viking-themed, magical, open-world exploration game. My friend Jofríður, JFDR is her musician name. She's contributing music to that one. So it was nice to see that present here too. Okay, 2 more showcases to go. First was the PC gaming show. The big news there was the announcement of Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector. Could not be more excited for that. It's coming very fast off the heels of the last batch of Citizen Sleeper DLC. It seems that Gareth Damian Martin has had this cooking the whole time. So we're getting a sequel to Citizen Sleeper. It was a story trailer. From what we understand, you're going to be taking a ship out into the universe this time, so you're not going to be on Erlin's Eye for the whole time. So that's interesting. I'm interested to see how that manifests. Gareth did a little Q&A on the Fellow Traveller Discord, Fellow Traveller being the publisher, and answered a few questions there, and talked a little bit about managing a crew. So if you've got people that are having different reactions, and if you talk to them or don't, or give them jobs or don't, that could be an interesting little crew simulation using those Citizen Sleeper action wheels and dice rolls. That seems really cool. And I love the idea of just adapting and evolving that absolutely gripping formula to include space exploration and getting off the station. Very exciting. I think there was a 2024 release window on that. We saw a little bit more of Nivalis. This is the follow-up to Cloudpunk, a game that I've played half of, was going to review, never quite got to. It's a voxel cyberpunk game. If you have not seen what Cloudpunk looks like, watch a trailer. You're taking a little car, like a flying car, and you're going through a Neo-Tokyo style cosmopolis in your little flying car, weaving in and out between neon billboards, rain, other cars. You're trying to find locations and stuff. And Cloudpunk was a very flawed game. You play as a taxi driver, and so you're ferrying people around, and it was Fetch Quest City. But Nivalis looks like a much bigger version of it. Cloudpunk felt to me like a student game that had been taken to its apex, or as far as they could push it. More of an interesting experiment than anything else. Nivalis looks more like a more fully formed game. There are polygonal characters in this voxel world this time, so it has a little bit more clarity to look at. The cyberpunk world seems to have been pushed up even further with beautiful light. The UI looks more slick. That was a bit of a problem in Cloudpunk 2. The mood is right. So I'm really curious to see if Nivalis can be the game that I was hoping Cloudpunk would be. It's nice to see them persisting with that style and taking it further. Third game I've got here out of 4 was Dread Pilots from Clay Entertainment, the makers of Griftlands and Don't Starve. This is a top-down vehicle game. And when I say top-down, I mean truly top-down. This is like from above. Looking like at a 90-degree angle down to the ground, like Alien Breed, supercars, Hotline Miami kind of view. And you're piloting an unwieldy craft through an underwater environment, mining, evading enemies, and surviving. It was quite a dry trailer. We didn't see a lot of gameplay, but I love Clay Entertainment, and I love underwater games. So Dread Pilots goes onto my watch list. And the final one, another really interesting one, Exo Rally Championship. I covered Exo 1 on this show last year. It's a sequel to that. So Exo 1 was the game where you have like a flying ball that can turn into a disc, and you go across beautiful, undulating, exoplanetary surfaces. So exploring the moons and alien planets and just this rolling landscape. And you shoot high into the air, you fall down, you hit a curve and shoot up again. So it's very gravity physicsy. It had this beautiful post-rock soundtrack, and there was rain on your visor, this big sound, and these beautiful expanses to explore. Absolutely fascinating game. Exo Rally Championship seems to take that mood and turn it into a rally game. So rather than just this traversing towards a point where you'll get a story thing, which is what happened in Exo 1, now you're specifically trying to get timed laps, and go from checkpoint to checkpoint with that same dreamy outer space vibe. So Exo Rally Championship looked amazing. Really glad to see that developer moving on as well. The final game in this epic block of all the gaming news, Ubisoft had a forward, so their little version of a direct. Lots of Ubisoft rubbish in there, but one game that really leaped out to me. They're making a Star Wars game. When I first heard that, I was not filled with optimism, but having seen the trailer, it looks really good. It's called Star Wars Outlaws. It's an open world Star Wars adventure in which you play like a female Han Solo-esque rogue character. So you're going around doing little jobs, doing things for people. Looks like you're doing some crimes and you're selling stuff. And it nailed the Star Wars vibe. It had that music. It had the cool-looking architecture and ships and the mood of that universe. It seemed to really nail it. As always with Ubisoft, there are questions about the structure of the game. Is it going to be truly open world? Is there going to be enough variety? Is it going to be cookie-cutter activities that you repeat for tens of hours? I hope not. And I can imagine that making a Star Wars game seems like a huge opportunity to them. It was the most viewed trailer of their showcase, which included several Assassin's Creed titles. So obviously it's a big deal for them. And I hope that they break from their cookie-cutter formula just a little, because they have been criticized for it quite widely in the last few years. But the game looks spectacular. We saw a little bit of gun combat. We saw some stealth. We saw some exploring. We saw a jet bike chase. And then we saw a ship flying out of the atmosphere and then dogfighting in space. And that was just, my heart stopped when I saw that. I was like, oh my God, you can fly out of the planet in your ship, get engaged in space combat, and then jump to another planet. How that all manifests in the game, we're yet to know much about, but it looked like the best bits of Jedi Survivor, the freedom, the exploration, and all of the little side quests and the people that you meet. So fingers crossed for that. Star Wars Outlaws. It has a 2024 release date, but who really knows, right? Games seem to get a year-long delay pretty regularly these days, but let's wait and see. And after watching all of those showcases and seeing so many games trailers and getting a little bit burned out on game trailers, like so many times that I heard the word "in a world where everything was taken, only you," etc. Like, I just started rolling my eyes at the start of every trailer. They seem to just share a vocabulary, a very small vocabulary of how to describe your game. Game trailers are truly bereft of imagination. So it was very fun to actually get back to playing some games. I picked up the Viewfinder demo. It's a short demo, but this is the game. It looks a little bit like Witness, in which you have a camera, a Polaroid camera. You can take pictures of the environment. If you then hold that picture up against a wall or against a space, then that picture will become real. You let go of it, you can then walk into the picture. It's not as simple as walking into like a frame and just coming out in a new environment. It's actually a little more interesting than that. The 3D elements of the picture will spring to life. And as you walk into them, you see distorted geometry. If you look behind the picture you've just put down, it actually wipes out the structures that were behind it entirely as well. So it has quite a profound effect on the environment that you are in. So you have to use this to solve puzzles. You can, for example, if you're looking at a wall, you can take a Polaroid picture of a door, hold it up to that wall, and then you can walk through that wall using the door that you just placed there. It turns out that there is a lot of interesting stuff in this game. They stuffed the demo. For example, if you find a picture of a Mario level with like platforms, moving platforms, headbuttable boxes, etc., power-ups, if you hold that up, it will become real. You can walk towards it. All of those structures are now in 3D, and suddenly you are bouncing up Mario-style platforming levels that are set in this real world. It's like this rift where you're getting all different kinds of art, like a child's drawing, for example. You can walk into a child's drawing and you have to go into the house that this child has drawn. You can walk into a pixelated environment, a very heavily pixelated environment that looks like a game from the 90s, and then back out into the real world. You find recordings lying around that start to explain a little bit of what's going on. It was only a 10-minute demo, but I'm hooked. The only downside of it was that it has absolutely atrocious VO of the Forspoken variety. For example, the first time that I used a picture to change the environment, the unwanted co-pilot in my head said, "Did you just shift reality? Sick." And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, fuck. Like, what are you doing, developers? Don't do this to me. And I turned around, there was a teleporter there, and then she went, "A teleporter!" And I was like, yeah, I fucking see it, for God's sake. So, awful VO that is just telling you what you've just done and making it much less interesting somehow. And it feel more prosaic than it actually felt to play. So this VO is actively taking away from the sense of wonder that you're feeling by trivializing it. Really, really bad. I hope that does not ship with the game, but it's at such a late stage now. But that demo is available on PS5. I also played the demo for Final Fantasy XVI. I was not planning to pick up this game. I'm not a big Final Fantasy fan, although I do have some fondness for 7, which I played as a teen, and the remake that I'm close to the end of now. But this is pretty good, actually. It's a substantial demo. I think there was a couple of hours of gameplay there, and you get to play an opening area. You then go into a flashback. There is lots and lots of combat in this game. There's lots and lots of story. The graphical style is really cool. The combat is very snappy. It's based on dodging and striking and countering. No parrying, thank God. So you're dodging around a little bit Bayonetta-like. You have to dodge. If you get a perfect dodge, they slow down. You can hit them fast. Real time, different abilities that you can employ. It felt very, very satisfying. And on normal difficulty, it was easy, actually. Like, I got through it, I think, being hit twice at all. I really got a feel for that combat straight away, which is quite rare for me in fast-paced action games. I love the story. It's got a lot of Game of Thrones influence, I would say. Like, there are these dreamy kids like Bran, and they have wolves as pets, and you're in a medieval European-feeling fantasy world, a lot like Game of Thrones. There was some court intrigue going on, and then there were the classic Final Fantasy elements like giant avatars, like the Balrog type of stuff, Ifrit and all of that. like the fire monsters, the elemental gods. And we got to use some of those, and we even got to play as them, which was so cool. Seems like it's taken a little bit from Bayonetta 3. So I would say that this has Lord of the Rings imagery, a Game of Thrones story, a really cool JRPG visual style, a Bayonetta-style combat system, and then all of that Final Fantasy lore woven into it as well. I was really blown away by this demo, and I went and bought the game. It's out in a week. So if you have access to the Final Fantasy 16 demo, I say give it a try. And finally, that demo put me in the mood for JRPGs. I didn't want to wait to play it. So I pulled one out of the backlog and played some Tales of Arise. I've been playing it most of the day today. I have a couple of days off work just to relax and rejuvenate myself, so I thought I'll tuck into a big substantial game. Tales of Arise is great. This is a game that I played the demo of, bought, forgot about, but it's got a wonderful visual style. Everything is so painterly. It has like black lines around things as if they've been sketched in ink. It's like a moving anime. And the story is good, it's a traditional JRPG story. You play as a hero who has forgotten his identity and must discover it through talking to other people, moving through a story. You get a party pretty quickly. There is like a rebellion movement. There is an oppressive alien force. It's a mixture of fantasy and sci-fi in that Final Fantasy way, that classic Final Fantasy way. The combat is great. And it minimizes some of the problems that keep me from being a big JRPG fan, such as super regular field encounters that just come on such a fast cadence that they fracture the gameplay experience by making you just fight and fight and fight and fight and win and win and win, rack up XP, heal, fight again, heal, fight, win. It's just such a boring loop. This game does a much better version of that. There are field enemies, and it does go into a little combat arena when you fight them, but it's not on a cadence. You can choose to walk around them, and they are very easy to avoid. So you choose how much you want to engage with regular combat. So I've been skipping 2 and then doing 1 if I see an interesting looking enemy, or a lot of them at once, because I know I can win and get more XP and resources. I leveled up pretty well and have done the first big story boss of the game. Did not feel like I had to grind. Didn't feel that I was underleveled or that I had to grind for resources to improve my weapons and so forth. I was able to just sail through it, enjoy the beautiful visuals, enjoy these huge set pieces, and it's interspersed with cartoons. So rather than a traditional CG cutscene, sometimes you'll get a Gravity Rush style comic book sequence in which you see the characters animated within frames, delivering dialogue one beat at a time, which I really like. Sometimes you will get a full-on anime cartoon. Sometimes they're up to like a minute or 2 minutes long, where you're just delivered a cutscene, such as the result of taking down a giant boss, what happens immediately after. You might get that in a dramatic cartoon. Really funny. I really enjoyed it. This feels like the most polished and modernized JRPG that I have played. So maybe you will hear me talking about this game again in the future, or maybe I will just bounce as soon as Final Fantasy comes out. Let's see. That was Tales of Arise. All right, we did it. That was it. That was 7 showcases. That was 30 games. And before we get on to the review, let me just mention this is a patron-supported show. If you enjoy this podcast and you would like to come and talk to me and all of the other patrons on Discord about what you're playing, find out what Between the Cracks games were in the showcases, people have been seeing and finding and posting all kinds of great things. We play games in there. We've got a bracket challenge. We've got a channel for Wordle. We've just picked up a new daily game recommended by B Sushi, so thank you for that. It's a coffee golf game. So it's a couple of holes of golf on a touchscreen format. You just pull back, you have 3 clubs, you let go to let fly, and you get like a Wordle-style score for how few shots you got to do it in. I've been absolutely addicted to it, playing it every day. So everyone is posting their coffee golf scores as well. So if you would like to get involved with all of that, then you can become a patron at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. You will also get 10 off-topic episodes about music and other things. You can become a patron for as little as $1, a pound, or €1 a month. A big thank you to all my existing patrons, and a big thank you to you if you would like to support this podcast and come join the community. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild. And with all of that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of this episode, Harmony, the Fall of Reverie. So Harmony, the Fall of Reverie is developed and published by Don't Nod, the makers of Life is Strange 1 and 2, Tell Me Why, and Vampire. They're currently making that climbing game I talked about, Jusant. The music is by Lena Rain, who did the soundtracks for Celeste famously and also Chicory, a bit of a famed and beloved video game composer. And as you can hear, the soundtrack is really good in this game, really atmospheric, really enjoyed it. How Long to Beat only has 2 ratings insofar as it just came out a few days ago. Those guys say they completed it in 8 hours. I felt like mine was like 12 to 15, and I felt like I read pretty fast. My Switch has not told me how long I've been playing the game yet. It just still says first played 4 days ago or whatever. But I think it's a pretty substantial game. Metacritic currently has this at 75. It has a high of 90 from Checkpoint Gaming, who say it's a nuanced story, beautifully told, with many diverging paths. It has a low of 40 from The Guardian, who say it's a game of many parts that don't come together. So this one has really split the critics, but 75 is quite respectable, and I wouldn't argue with that score. I actually agree with both of those statements. I do think it is a beautifully told, nuanced story, and I also think it is a game of many parts that don't fully come together, so I'll be talking more about why. The developers described this game by saying, Harmony, the Fall of Reverie follows Polly's return home to search for her missing mother in her hometown of Atina. As she arrives, Polly is transported into the Reverie, an intangible realm populated by aspirations, beings that embody humanity's hopes, dreams, and boundless intelligence. And my take on this one is that it's an ambitious and substantial visual novel that plays with a broad spectrum of ideas about hope, chaos, capitalism, community, mysticism, and the power of collective belief. However, the story succeeds despite the game itself, and only just. And I think I am going to be a little hard on this game, but I have to say, just at the outset, I did binge it in a weekend in just a few sittings. I really couldn't put it down. I really wanted to see where the story would go. And even if getting to the finale was a sometimes frustrating experience, the story is worth hearing, and it begins when you play as Polly. You are a young woman, like maybe late 20s, early 30s, returning to her home city of Atina. Polly is coming back from elsewhere because her mother, Ursula, has vanished. Ursula is a bit of a mystery. It might be to do with a corporation called MK, who is kind of dominating this island. And you get home, you go back to your mum's place. It's a really spectacular former hippie commune in an old swimming pool building. So, for example, you'll see a little animated scene of the exterior. It has stained glass windows and palm trees around it. And then a little animated scene of the interior, just a little camera pan, and you'll see that the kitchen is actually in the bottom of the swimming pool. It's a very cool piece of architecture. But Ursula is nowhere to be seen. And as Polly, you look for her. You find a amulet. I should stress, when I say look for her, this is not a game where you get to move around. This is a screen-by-screen visual novel, so this kind of just happens. But you find an amulet, and it whisks you into another world, a world called Reverie. You arrive in an island floating in the sky in a cloudscape. A strange girl is near you called Bliss. She explains that Reverie is a separate realm where human aspirations live. The embodiment of human aspirations become an individual. Bliss is the embodiment of bliss. She's like a playful anime e-girl type with like pink hair and like a phone, and she's always playing on a little switch thing. And these will appear on the screen in that visual novel style. Polly will appear as an animated character on the left. Bliss will appear on the right, and their dialogue plays out. So you get these little portraits of people. You get a backdrop that shows you the location that you're in, and that's how you play the game. You will meet some of the other aspirations. Power, a big square-shouldered, military-style dude. Bond, who is an empathic, swampy druid guy who is described as a tree hugger by one of the others. Truth, who is a glowing, justice-like figure who speaks in very broad, academic terms almost, like she's the stiffest of the aspirations. And there are other aspirations that you will meet, but I won't spoil them here. So in Reverie, everyone calls Polly Harmony, and they all know who she is. She doesn't know who they are. They have to introduce themselves. They all have little spaces in Reverie that you can go to, like a retreat home room where you can go and talk to them. And this story setup is a lot, so just please bear with me. When Polly is in Reverie, everyone calls her Harmony, and they all know who she is. They say that she is the new Oracle, and that there is one Oracle from the human world who has to come and talk to the aspirations. She is now that Oracle. They seem to see her as a kind of a saviour figure. There are problems in Reverie that seem to mirror some of the problems that are happening in the human world, which they refer to as brittle. So Reverie is in crisis. They thrive on belief, human belief, which they refer to as a mystic substance called egregor. I looked this up because egregor, although it looks like a strange word, it sounded like a real word to me, and it does turn out that it is an old world for collective belief in manifesting things, in the manifestation of human belief. And the concepts around that, I guess it would be faith in the Christian tradition. And if you've read or watched Neil Gaiman's American Gods, you will know about this when we meet like a down-on-his-luck Thor. No one believes him anymore, and he owns a bar, and all of these gods that have lost their followers and are so fading from existence. Similar situation here, seems like. So that's the crisis in Reverie. And as Polly is empowered to travel between the realms, between the dream world of Reverie to talk to the aspirations, and the human world called Brittle, they need your help to restore balance, to figure out what's going on with egregor. And they will each try to guide your actions. They will each try to gain influence with you throughout the story. They will try and give you advice. But it also seems sometimes like it's a little political. Each one of them does represent a philosophy or a world view. And so you have these conflicting world views, the embodiment of them trying to persuade you to come around to their philosophical outlook. And that is a very cool idea, having these various voices fighting for your attention. They are politicking, they have agendas, there is intrigue, and they're quite interesting characters. They are voiced, which I really like. And in that way, it's a little like Disco Elysium. You know, you have all the voices in your head in Disco Elysium. Like you will have your brute self, you will have your sensitive self, you will have your lizard brain self in Disco Elysium all fighting for your attention. Except here, it is this playful, interesting range of philosophical concepts arguing for your attention. And it's very differently implemented here and with a very different vibe. The colour palette here is very fresh. It's very sketched. It's got a slightly cartoony feel to it, although the drawings are really nice. Like, maybe not cartoony. What I mean to say is illustrated. It looks hand-drawn, the whole game. So it has a very different vibe to Disco Elysium. This game is, I would say, sensitive in that Life is Strange kind of style. It's inclusive in a way that Disco Elysium is certainly not. Disco Elysium is super unpolitically correct and plays with lots of different highfalutin ideas about communism and all that kind of thing. Different vibe here, but the system of having voices talk to you did remind me of it a little bit. And the way that this plays out is, it is a visual novel, so you have those portraits, they are semi-animated, they are fully voiced, very nicely presented. I'd say that the characterizations are closer to something like Neon White than they are to stuff like perhaps Pyre or Paradise Killer. They're very short, fleeting encounters you have with people. Sometimes the conversation's over before they have really begun, and that's where the problems with Harmony start to come in. The structure of the game is very, very different. When I think about things like Pyre, where you have different characters chirping in, chiming in, and yet somehow with this vast cast of characters, it hangs together very well, makes you feel like you're on a journey. The way that this game is set up is not like that. It's more like these little hit and run, few lines from this person, few lines from this person, different background, so it's a bit choppy. And it is a lot, I would say, at the beginning. You will be whipped mid-conversation between the worlds sometimes. So say you're in the pool area talking to a relative or an old friend. Suddenly you might get a loading screen and then be loaded into Reverie, where someone has pulled you into Reverie, and suddenly you're talking to a druid in the woods, and then suddenly you're whipped back across into the other world, mid-conversation, to continue the conversation you were having. Loading screen, and it's just a lot. New characters are introduced pretty much constantly at the start of the game. I didn't feel like I really got to know any of them. The encounters were also fleeting. It took a long time for me to really get a feel for who they were. And by the end, I think I got there, but it was not easy going getting to that point of feeling connection with the characters and the scenario. But another aspect of this game is that there is a choice system. So there is a decision tree called the augural. You can scroll ahead on it. It's like a little bubble graph, and you can scroll ahead into the future and see different outcomes. You can find one that you like, and notionally, you should be able to draw a path back to where you are and see the decisions that you will take that should lead you to the outcome that you want. Seems like a good idea, but I did not play this way. I found it to be a bit of an incomprehensible tangle of interlinked events. And if the front end of the game is very well presented, the back end of the game, you actually get to see this bubble chart. It's just like little bubbles on a black background. You click on the thing you want to happen sometimes. Not good. It feels like a little peek under the hood of the car. And in this case, I like a decision system. I like choice. I think it's been done well in different ways. Like cause and effect is sometimes represented in a speech bubble when you're talking to a character in a game, not in this one, but in other games. They've managed to do choice in ways where you know when you're making a consequential choice, but you cannot see into the future. But then, like in Detroit Become Human, at the end of every chapter, you do see the line graph of all of the choices not taken, the roads not taken, and what led you to where you are. But you see it in hindsight. I think here they were trying to tilt that forward so you could see the future and have that become part of the gameplay. But it doesn't really work. I found myself just taking my choices by shooting from the hip, pretty much, based on who I felt like I was agreeing with, basically. And so I freewheeled through this story, almost ignoring this augural mechanic where you can make choices intentionally for desired outcomes. And I have to say as well that just the way that this looks is a little bit like dev tools. It's like you're looking at this decision tree. It looks like something that exists under every decision-based story game or every visual novel, like A plus B equals C, and then you get to go down path D. And down D, then you make more choices that lead you to path F. But I don't think I wanted to see it as the player. And I felt like it's better when that stuff isn't visible. It really, really gamifies what you're doing. It lets you see the structure of the game. And that took my attention away from the real meat of this game, which is the story. So I do wonder how this system came about. I do wonder if it came from that. Like they had this big diagram and they were like, let's just show it to the player. I've got an inkling that maybe it did come from there. But who knows, really? It's certainly an interesting decision. I don't particularly think it's a good one. It was more loading screens as well, getting into that decision tree to make a decision, and then 3 seconds later, be loaded back into the game. But the aspirations do chime in during choices. They will give you their side of the story, tell you what they think you should do. If you side with a certain aspiration or you choose their preferred path, you will bank some points with them. Those mount up over time until you get like an affinity level. So the aspiration that you have, or the aspirations that you have sided with the most, will become more useful in endgame because you've used them more. And I will say that even if this game sometimes feel like it's creaking under the weight of its own structure and just how many ideas are jammed in both the story and the scenario and all of these different aspirations and what they're saying about the philosophy of being, what they're saying about what people believe and how that affects world events. It's a lot, but I appreciate the complexity. There are so many ideas that have been forced together in this game, and I really have to salute that level of ambition. They really took a big swing with this one, and whether or not the ins and outs of it worked out, that is worthy of respect for sure. But to get into the meat of the criticism that I've been alluding to here, this is a very disjointed gameplay experience. You skip between scenes, which are sometimes just seconds long, very quickly. And not just scenes, but worlds. So you're skipping between characters that are in your mind or in a different world, real-life conversations, different locations, of which there are tens. The game is constantly changing, constantly loading, even mid-conversation. And loading is a problem in this game, at least it was where I played it on Switch. And because of that, I think I struggled to find my bearings, and I felt a little disconnected from the journey in a way that I didn't have to be. If there wasn't a decision tree and decisions just played out, or if it was diegetic, like if it was in the game itself rather than a separate menu-style screen, or if it loaded quicker, or if scenes were edited differently so that the aspiration appears in frame rather than in a different scene you have to load into and then load back into your conversation. All of these things could have really changed it. I mean, for example, at one point I was having a meaningful catch-up with a friend in the real world, and then I was suddenly whisked away and unceremoniously loaded into Reverie to talk to an aspiration about that conversation that I'm having, and then I was whipped back into the conversation. Lengthy loading screens, 10-second loading screens, sometimes for 5 seconds, and a few button clicks. I was in a perpetual state of narrative whiplash, being pulled from left to right and place to place and world to world. I think being able to linger in one place just for a little while now and then, to be able to go at my own pace, to be able to examine objects in an environment, like if I could pick up my mother's old jacket, if I could look at the picture on the wall, maybe that would have connected me to the places. If the conversations were more well edited so that you speak to someone and you feel like you had that whole conversation, you might feel more connected to them as a person. Even things like a visual flourish when you're moving between realms to signify the change, and that being a bigger deal, like moving between worlds being a bigger deal, where you have the time to mentally shift and be ready for it, if you know what I mean, and feel more grounded in those different places, and less like I was bouncing between morsels of plot. I will also say there's a couple of other big criticisms I have here. Sometimes the visual background didn't match what was happening in the story. I'm not quite sure why. For example, if you are infiltrating a city tower in search of an ancient site, or a lab, or, whatever, the background will be on the screen, the city tower. So you're standing in a street, there's a bright, bustly city street behind you, there's traffic sound. But as the story progresses, let's say you get to that lab, you get through security, you have to do a whole bunch of choices to get there. In-game, sometimes it's still the exterior of the tower that you're looking at, and so it's really discombobulating. Sometimes I felt like they, in designing this game, they had made misjudgment in assets that they required and not had them created, and it created a sense of discombobulation and disconnection in my mind. Like if the text is telling me I'm in a glassy lab sneaking between security, and what I'm looking at is a busy New York-style street, what is that exactly? It's not matching the visual to the novel, if you know what I mean. I would also say sometimes it was a little rough around the edges in terms of the pure amount of information that was coming at me, and where that slots into the story. I didn't feel like the design was entirely crisp. For example, when you first meet someone, you'll get a little notification that you now have a codex entry about them. If you open that codex entry, you will get far more information than you should have, like having just met that person. I met a character called Omar. I got my little ping, I checked the codex, and it said, from all his phone calls, it appears he has several brothers and a sister. And I've literally just met him. There haven't been any phone calls. Like, this isn't information that I should be reading right now. Again, in different games, that information is delivered sequentially rather than just dumped on you. So in better designed games, you will get the information that is salient or relevant to the time at which you're meeting a character, that takes into account how much you know about them. Here it was just like a little info dump. So little things like that made me wonder if this game could have been a little tighter just on all fronts. I think that you can see that in basically the mistakes with backgrounds, too much info too soon, and the loading between things constantly. I feel like this needed a firmer hand on the overview, like I guess it comes down to the game's director, but making sure all those little pieces slot together, it would have made this a much cleaner, better game. So to go into some of the good things and bad things about Harmony, the Fall of Reverie, it's a very engaging world and it's a very intriguing story. I really like where it goes. I like the attitudes that it has towards society. I like that it has thoughts. It has a point of view on how capitalism and hypercapitalism ultimately turn out. I like that it has the semi-mystical look at the drives that drive humanity, at the dreams that drive humanity, and how that manifests and what it looks like when people lose that. It was more than enough to keep me playing. It was just a fascinating world and a really cool cast of characters. I do want to emphasize that despite my criticisms, that even if the delivery method for story and choices kind of sucks sometimes, the game itself is full of good content. I would say the visuals are really fresh and bright and arresting. All of the locations were interesting when they were present, and the characterizations of the player character, with her expressions of anger or concern or pensiveness or happiness, a sympathetic smile, like they had a nice range of emotion delivered in the animated avatars that you see on the screen. I thought the music was very nice. I liked the deep lore that you get for the place itself. Like the city has different districts that you can learn about. You can go in as deep as you want, really, into the codex. When people mention things, they do appear in your codex. So there is a rich world here for you to discover and a rich set of characters. And the questions they are asking are fundamentally interesting and more ambitious than you find in most video games. As for the downsides, I played on Switch. Load times almost killed this game for me. It's 10 seconds to load between pretty much anything. I would say 8 to 10 seconds. And if you flash into a screen in your house and someone says, "So, what's the plan?" 10 seconds to load into the decision tree, and you click what you want to do. 10 seconds to load back into the house for that person to then respond. And so you've just played a minute of game in which 30 seconds were loading screens and transitions. Very discombobulating. I feel like if this was a game that was designed on SSD systems or fast memory PCs, then that's great. But maybe it is just the Switch. But this little system, it became infuriating to have to wait so much for such little reward. I really wish that the game had been consolidated, so there was less loading and less flashing between dialogue, screen, location, dialogue, location, choice screen, all of that stuff. Like they could have trimmed it, honed it, and made it much better. As for the choice stuff, like as I said, I freewheeled through it. There were some choices in the end game where it had requiring conditions. These pop up sometimes in game, like you come to an event, and if you've done something in the past, like if you gave someone your, I don't know, crystal of whatever, then they have that crystal available in that specific situation. If you didn't, the crystal gets lost. Things like that. So decisions that you make are consequential, but the closer you get to endgame, the more times you will see required conditions appearing that you never really saw on your playthrough, because sometimes on the decision tree, you can be in 10 different places on the decision tree. You don't read all of them. I mean, I didn't at least. So sometimes I felt like, because I hadn't felt engaged by the augural and like planning my journey through the story, I had perhaps missed information and not gotten my ideal outcome. But maybe that's on me. So that's Harmony of Reverie. I would say if you're thinking of playing it, play it on a next-gen console or a computer with an SSD drive. I think it's about $20, and I think it's worth it if this concept sounds interesting to you, if this world and these characters sound interesting to you, and if you're up for a slow game in a futuristic society with choice and visual novel elements, and you're interested in those philosophical questions. It's not heavy at any time. It's all very breezy, but it's just a nice, calm and pleasant world to go into. I had a really good time with it. I enjoyed how the story unfolded. If it wasn't for the loading times, I think I would go back in and maybe take a few different choices. I would have liked to align myself with other aspirations. I found myself aligning mostly with Bond, who is the empathic consensus maker, which kind of aligns with me as a person. But I would love to do a power playthrough or a truth playthrough and just see where those end up, because from the look of the decision tree, it can go in some pretty wild directions. That's Harmony, the Fall of Reverie. So that's the episode. It's a long one. Well done. We've just passed the hour mark. If you have made it this far, then well done. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed that half-hour news block and that review of Harmony, the Fall of Reverie. I would like to hear from people if you have played this game. Which aspiration did you side with? If you've played on a different console, will loading times an issue for you? I'm genuinely fascinated. Or if you're thinking of playing it, just get in touch, let me know. I'm on Twitter at Gaming in the Wild. I'm also on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the places. You can find me. You can find all of those links at gaminginthewild.com. Also, if you would like to come and join the Discord, get into the conversation, become part of the gang, you can do so. Just become a supporter at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. It's a lovely bunch of people, and it's always fun when someone new drops by. So you're welcome to do so. I'll be back next week with another episode. I'm playing Tales of Arise at the moment, but honestly, I'm feeling a little all over the place with what I'm playing. There's a lot going on. There's lots of games on my mind. So I'm not sure what next week's show will be about, but I will sweep up any further interesting game announcements that come out as well. Thanks very much for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.